Hello, my name is Tim Lane and I am Editor-in-Chief of Surgery.International. Surgery.International is a free-to-access resource, and it's used by over 20,000 surgeons from the international surgical community. It contains news items and features from around the globe. Today we're focusing on a news item we are featuring on the site about the non-financial costs of surgical training. And I'm very pleased to have with me today Roberta Garau, who is President of ASiT, which is the Association of Surgeons in Training in the United Kingdom. So Roberta, a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction.
Roberta, would you just like to tell us a little about yourself and about the role of ASiT for those who aren't UK trainees and are from further afield?
I am a general surgery trainee in Scotland, and I've been elected as president of the Association of Surgeons in Training in March of this year. And for those of you who don't know what ASiT is, it is an independent charity run by surgical trainees for surgical trainees, and we represent trainees in the UK and Republic of Ireland. We are almost 50 years old, and it really started as a small forum for senior trainees to discuss training matter and training issues. And it has now grown to having over 3,000 members, either surgical trainees or aspiring surgeons. And we do a lot of advocacy work, courses, and a big conference in March of each year. So that's a bit of the association in a nutshell for those who don't know what we do.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Roberta. Now, the report which ASiT commissioned recently concentrates mainly on the non-financial costs of surgical training. Now, ASiT has previously published on the financial impact of training back in 2017 and highlighted the nearly £50,000 of personal costs to achieve educational requirements. And it highlighted the lack of funding for mandatory courses and a lack of transparency about those costs. And I know ASiT are due to report later this year on an update on those financial costs. But for now, could you give us an idea about the report's findings about the non-financial costs?
So we decided to look into the non-financial cost of training due to a lot of evidence that was coming out through GMC training surveys and workforce census of issues and burnout in surgical trainees, and also the worry of a lot of trainees either not completing training or deciding to leave the UK or the Republic of Ireland because of their training. So that's why we have done this report, and we looked at physical well-being, mental well-being, and kind of work-life balance of trainees, and also their satisfaction in a career in surgery. And we collected answers from 500 or almost 500 respondents. And what it highlighted is that surgical training has a profound effect, a negative effect on trainees' physical health and mental health, with almost 1 in 5 trainees needing, for example, non-pharmacological treatment for the effect that training has on their physical health, and 1 in 5 needing to take time off due to the effect of training on their physical health. And as you can imagine, things like MSK problems, poor sleep, exhaustion really featured highly. And the results were similar for looking at the impact on mental health. Over 70% reported that surgical training has a negative impact on their mental health. And again, burnout, stress, poor quality of life, loss of confidence were really featured in the survey. And 1 in 4 trainees have needed to take sick leave due to the effect of surgical training on their mental health, which is a huge number of trainees and a loss of a kind of productivity that we really do need to address. And as you can imagine, the main issues are related to kind of the workplace, but also the nature of training in the UK that might be a bit different from the training for a lot of international followers. So main issues that we're having in the UK is staffing level and rota pattern not being conducive to a work-life balance, really.
So the figures were really quite shocking, really. I
Yes.
suspect for many trainees and senior surgeons, they're not a huge surprise, but I think most people were surprised by the actual the level of the impact. And I think it'll be absolutely shocking to the general public to see this is the impact we've got on the next generation of surgical trainees. So like you said, there's 76% impact on physical health. This is the physical well-being, 85% on mental health, with a quarter of those needing some counselling, 10% medication, nearly 25% having a sick leave. But also the negative impact it's having on relationships, whether that's friends, family, and personal relationships. And it put into to figures. 90% of trainees regularly missing in important milestones in family events, which just seems nonsensical to complete surgical training. So I mean, I know the report went on to look at some of the causes. What were sort of the causes about the impact on physical health? It was things like, I think, exhaustion, poor diet, lack of exercise. But what other features sort of cropped up in the report as possible causes for these findings?
So related specifically to physical health, as we said, sometimes the issues are related to our work environment. So having to do long shifts and being unable to have, for example, water fountain or availability out of hour of healthy meal option. And at the same time, people finding that because they have to work extra shifts or they have to do extracurricular activities to progress in training, they're unable to cook their meals at home because they just don't have enough time or because of the commuting. So, there's a huge problem of being able to keep a healthy lifestyle, healthy diet. And one thing also that really caught me was the discussion on a lot of people talking about leads and having to wear leads throughout the day and not having a provision of, for example, safe leads for women. And there is more and more surgeons who are women and they don't have appropriate protective equipment and they are worried about the impact that that's going to have on their physical health in their long term. So there is a lot of things there to unpick, really.
And in terms of the mental health side of things, again, rather shockingly, bullying, burnout, stress associated with the job. An interesting thing that came out, which was about changes in the recruitment process, aiming for recruitment, and then all of a sudden, when you get there, the goalposts change, and the additional sort of stress there. The fact that there seems to be almost no pastoral care whatsoever, and some of the very practical things that you would have thought could easily be changed, like rota gaps and unsafe working patterns, and the whole nature about rotational training seems to be having a massive impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what the report has seen is that it seems there is a kind of a lack of care for the trainee and almost a lack of interest on trainees as a person, really. And as you said, there is almost no pastoral care that is provided for trainees, especially when trainees are, for example, unsuccessful in a highly competitive field. There seems to be no support for trainees. And with the fact that we rotate a lot, and it's not just rotating through hospital, what trainees really don't like is the geographical nature of rotation. You tend to move people away from their support network. So you're also removing that pastoral care from the outside world, outside of their training, so that people are away from their family and their loved ones, and their relationships suffer due to training, and that has a knock-on then effect on their well-being.
I think, at least from my perspective, that the real strength of the ASiT reports come from not just highlighting problems, but actually coming out with some, let's say, pretty sensible recommendations. And the recommendations from the report really centered on three areas: about uncertainty about the future, about work-life balance, and about addressing negative work cultures. So if you took the first one about uncertainty about the future, there's a lot of talk about assigning a base hospital, perhaps for one half of your rotation, with movement to other hospitals no longer 60 minutes away, and things like that. And at top of the list was actually changes to the recruitment process, whereby you don't have this sudden change of goal when you've been spending the last 2 or 3 years working up to a recruitment process. Those seem to be the most popular areas for change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think recruitment is a big part of life for trainees, and it comes, quite close in succession. In the UK, we do recruitment for core surgical training and then higher specialty training. And really, trainees spend a lot of money and a lot of effort in trying to improve their portfolio. And too often, the kind of goalposts get changed, 2 to 3 weeks before recruitment is open, which causes a huge amount of stress on trainees who are already stressed. And it's asking to be, in a way, respected and having that those changes made possible, a year in advance, so that people have time to prepare, and we remove some of that anxiety for trainees. So that was something that is very important to trainees and came top of the list.
And when it came to work-life balance, there were again some, I thought, some very basic practical suggestions. One was around annual and study leave being accepted without having to jump through loops. Simple things like having a combination of nights, something to eat when you're on duty overnight, as well as some self-development time. Would you like to expand on that? What did you mean by self-development time?
Yeah, so for surgical trainees in the UK, we have to do a lot of extracurricular activity to be able to progress in our training. So everybody needs to do an audit, for example. Everybody needs to be involved in teaching. We have a portfolio with reflective practice to maintain, and all these things take time. And at the moment, most people do all of that work outside of their paid work time. So during their weekends, their days off, they actually become a work day. So people are unable to really switch off and enjoy their time off, which exacerbates burnout. So the idea is that as part of our rota, we should have some time set aside for all these tasks that are still part of our job, and they should be part of our job plan, really, so that we can then have our time off as actual time off. So that's the idea. And it works very well in some other specialties that have high pressure. So in the UK, for example, it works for emergency medicine or general practice. So it is something that can be implemented.
Yeah, and like you say, this is work-based. This isn't free time. This is, you're not on the golf course. You're there doing required activity for you to progress. And why you should have to do that in your own time, unpaid, seems ridiculous. The last aspect was about addressing negative work cultures, which is always going to be the most challenging thing. It should be the easiest, of course, but it is perhaps the most toxic element of a trainee's existence. And again, there were some pretty, I thought, basic requests, which was things like having your rota provided far enough in advance for you to make life balance decisions, and about actually beginning to use a financial impact on trusts who have persistent rota gaps, which you are inevitably required to work. But I thought the most interesting thing was the recommendation to have an independent exit interview. Tell us a little bit about that.
So at the moment, we have some kind of independent quality control of our training, and that comes mostly through kind of liaison members from each specialty association body. But as you probably know, it's becoming harder and harder for consultants as well to have to be able to take the time to train and to quality assure training. So that is something that we want to push for, because it's really important. If you have a trust, for example, that has a negative working culture, it's really hard to then escalate it through in your trust, because everybody works in that environment and is accustomed to that environment. But if you have some externality, someone from another trust that you can talk to, they can actually be that external voice that can say, hang on, this is not right, this is not working, and this is how we can improve things. And so that's something that would be very much valued by trainees, who sometimes struggle to really find their voice and speak up and just accept some negative working environment and working culture. This is why we think it's extremely important. But as I said, it's really important that we professionalize trainers and those people who are at the moment often giving up their time for free, to make sure that we have good quality training in the UK.
That's fantastic. So my last question, Roberta, is who do you hope actually reads this report? Because I think for most surgeons, you will have a huge amount of support. But who should be reading this? Should this be with the heads of schools, who should be talking to TPDs about saying and mandating these changes, which are, I thought pretty basic, in terms of who you're hoping will read and affect change?
So as part of the association, we're very fortunate because we sit on a lot of important stakeholder meetings. So this has been presented to the Royal Colleges. It has been presented to the head of schools, for example. It has been presented to other trainees organizations from, for example, other specialties, non-surgical specialties, and it's getting brought forward through those levels. So we are really interested in getting this through stakeholders, which I think can really influence change. And at the same time, as you said, it's important also for the public to know what training means and what it does and the effect it has on trainees, to make sure that we do advocate for an improvement in our working conditions.
Well, Roberta, I'm sure this report will serve as a stark reminder to those responsible for the delivery of surgical training, as to the extent that it's impacting on the physical and mental well-being of the next generation of surgeons. And I very much hope that its conclusions will be acted upon. But for now, thank you very much for joining us. And for everybody who's listening, goodbye.